In my presentation today, I consider cinema in relation to the geological concept of the Anthropocene. I will be exploring the intersection of nature and femininity through engaging with the films Anthropocene, The Human Epoch, and Mother. Ultimately, this is an inquiry into how we can use cinema to inspire deeper considerations towards our relationship to Mother Nature. So this is just a brief outline of what I'll be talking about today and what I'm trying to achieve with my inquiry. So to start off, I just want to give some quick background into Anthropocene feminism, which is the larger framework from which this presentation is drawing upon. The term Anthropocene is still in the process of being considered to reference our current epoch. Many geologists still view it as a projection into the future. The term reflects the human-centered characteristic of this new epoch, and a number of scholars have written about it through a feminist lens. Rosie Braidotti has called for Zoe, stating that the humanities could have a place in developing long-term perspectives on a geocentered frame as opposed to one that is anthropocentric, and that there could be political implications to this. Anthropocene feminism, according to Lynn Huffer, focuses on the ontological rather than the epistemological, where we challenge traditional ontological frameworks that justify gender inequality and dichotomies of culture versus nature and mind versus body. Braidotti states that moving towards becoming geocentric calls for reconfiguration of established patterns of thought that will be emotionally demanding and potentially bring feelings of pain or loss at the level of identity. Nature is often related to the feminine. Martin Heidegger has stated that nature too was an artist, a female artist, in relation to how art was viewed prior to fine arts dominating the 19th century. Into the 19th century, Friedrich Nietzsche, however, viewed aesthetics as inherently masculine, where only men are capable of producing. He believed that a feminine aesthetics meant being a recipient of art through understanding the beautiful, which only exists in nature and is not of the mind. This reflects our current culture's tendency to idolize the creator, both in terms of male creators and human beings as creators in general. The false assumption in Nietzsche is that neither nature nor women have the agency to reveal truth via aesthetics, that nature and women are not capable of being creators and producers. This is reflected in cinema. Laura Mulvey has highlighted the way women are relegated to bearers of meaning without the capacity to make meaning. This can also be applied to the belief that it is only possible for the human mind to perceive, where non-humans in nature are viewed as objects that are a source for pleasure. If nature is tied to the feminine, then it can be understood in the tradition of aesthetics that nature will also be viewed as lacking agency. Human beings are the active creators, and nature is the passive bearer of meaning. Vanessa Watts argues that non-human agency has been erased as we become more anthropocentric. She challenges Western ontology through the indigenous conception of place thought. The theoretical understanding of the world is through physical embodiment. Watts describes how place thought is the conception that the land is alive and thinking. Humans and non-humans have agency through the extensions of the thoughts of the land. There's no separation between place and thought. The indigenous ontology outlined by Watts is the understanding that land is the embodiment of the feminine, as well as the belief in the origin story of the sky women, which is told through historical accounts of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee. Humans are understood to be extensions of the land, and there is an obligation to maintain and communicate with it. A loss of communication leads to an inevitable loss of identity, which includes the ability to think, act, and govern. This is different than the Western Christian origin story that separates humans from their surroundings and the view that nature is a chaotic force that needs to be controlled and dominated. The objectification of the feminine mimics the objectification of the land through Heidegger's concept of Earth as Bestand, meaning standing reserve, where we don't see nature as it is, we see nature in terms of what it can do for us. This is similar to how women in cinema are viewed within the culture industry. They are cultural standing reserves, a beautiful actress viewed in terms of the quantity of monetary resources she will yield for the studio. Her beauty is currency, and there's a desire to possess it until her image no longer brings pleasure or the woman is depleted of any capacity to continue within the industry. Historically, beauty has been connected to nature and women. Kant differentiates between beauty and sublime, the difference being that the sublime is internal and exists within ourselves, and beauty is external to us and found in nature. However, Heidegger has shown the way Nietzsche misinterpreted Kant's aesthetics. The problem isn't that nature is not connected to the sublime. The problem is the interpretation of Kant's statement that beauty is devoid of interest. Devoid of interest, as Kant intended, means that as a viewer you have no desire to possess what you see. You grasp the beautiful as purely as it shows itself. rather than Nietzsche's interpretation that it is a lack of substance or unrelated to the human experience. Nietzsche's male aesthetics could then be understood as incapable of truly comprehending the beautiful, of only being able to experience or see nature and what is considered beautiful through the lens of what we can learn about ourselves or how we can use it for our own gain. A sense for the beautiful is lost in viewing Earth as a standing reserve. A male aesthetics is always experiencing nature and women solely as sources of inspiration for art or to be used for human gain and pleasure. The films Anthropocene, The Human Epoch, and Mother allow for us to consider the way in which we treat both women and nature as standing reserves in society. So now to the analysis. My theoretical framework draws upon Gianni Vattimo and Jacques Rancière, where art has claim to truth. Aesthetics for Vattimo has to do with the meaning of the phenomena of art. This can be describing aesthetic experience or looking to define the meaning a work has in the present epoch. An ontological approach to art can mean both the general philosophical discourse as well as the specific reflection in a single work. Rancière believes that the task of art is to discover a new system of meanings that provides a new perspective and manner in which we arrange the world, where the response to the work must go beyond aesthetic enjoyment, and making viewers uncomfortable is not enough for a work to elicit action. Both Rancière and Vattimo's aesthetics consider the genuine artwork as being a glimpse into an emerging world. It isn't just understanding the world that leads to change, but a shift into another sensible world through the process of dissociation between what we see, think, and feel. Art as having ontological bearing means that art is a form of knowledge that speaks to reality. For an artist of revolutionary political engagement to be viewed as a phenomena, the artwork must be a movement towards the recovery of the ontological bearing of art. Vattimo views artistic value in the capacity for an artwork to bring a sense of tomorrow and today and representing a new world to be encountered or inhabited. An artwork impacts us and has been transmitted to consciousness when we are in dialogue with it, and it is an object of discourse. From both Mother and Anthropocene, The Human Epoch, there emerges a world where the possibility of human impact on this planet being irreversible is being confronted. And in the Anthropocene documentary, this is done through intermediality. The landscape photographs of Edward Burtynsky inspired the imagery of the Anthropocene documentary. These images are stunning, but they make it impossible to deny the reality of the world we live and give a sense to the possibility of an emerging reality. The depictions of our planet as at the mercy of human will, technology, and desire bring a sense of intense discomfort. Climate change isn't a distant crisis when the vastness of the impact of terraforming and forestry is shown through in the bird's eye view of the camera lens. In Mother, Darren Aronofsky uses allegory to retell the story of humanity through the eyes of the planet. He inverts our reality in a manner that is disarming. The camera techniques within the film force you into the subjective experience of the character Mother. The camera follows her as the active agent in the film, the main camera angles being the close-up, the over-the-shoulder, and POV. By subverting the male gaze for one that is female, it challenges the audience's ability to mediate the tension between recognition and misrecognition related to the process of identity formation that Mulvey discusses in her article Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema. Drawing on Vattimo and Heidegger, affect is an essential element of the value of an artwork, where art is about feeling rather than knowledge or action. Heidegger reconnected art with feeling and the movement towards art having ontological bearing. However, the link between art and feeling relies on the prophetic nature of the artwork, where subjective feeling in art that remains present-centered has limited opportunity for communication, while prophetic art can lead to the communication of endless possibilities of a new world that speaks to the present. Heidegger's concept of Stoss, the experience of shock produced by an artwork, is essential to the setting of truths. Mother provides a great example of this. It used both the inversion of narrative and shocking images to challenge our anthropocentric ontology by having the viewer question the idolatry of the creator. The character of the poet could be interpreted as God himself or the embodiment of God creating man in his image. We view the poet through the lens of Mother, who could be interpreted as the embodiment of nature and the feminine. The poet is driven by ego to the point of destruction. His desire to be adored by those who encounter his work leads to overcrowding and violence within their home. His ego leads to the death of his child and ultimately the death of Mother. Through the film, we see Mother working to build their home together, and the house isn't inanimate. It has a heart that beats and can feel pain, and when the house feels, so does Mother. This is first shown when the first guests, which could be considered as the first humans, arrive at the house and ignores Mother's request not to smoke inside. We travel into the house to see the heart contract and begin to turn black, causing mother to keel over in pain. The imagery Aronofsky uses is a literal heart that the camera travels to in the center of the house. The house is wounded after the appearance of the first guest, depicted through a bleeding floorboard in one of the rooms, which you can see at the top there. The element of Stoss comes through the intensely violent scenes where house guests beat mother and harm each other. The film posits that it is not nature that brings chaos and potential destruction, but rather it is humans that have disrupted the harmony of nature. In Anthropocene, the human epoch, it's easy to be mesmerized by the imagery that feels almost like a moving painting before being hit with the realization that you are witnessing mass destruction. Stoss is the encountering of an artwork that takes what you know and makes it unfamiliar to you. What you know is put into crisis. This is because, in the words of Vitimo, the work proposes a new general reorganization of the world, a new historical epoch. The film does this in the most literal sense. In the Anthropocene documentary, you see machines violently extracting marble from Carrara in Italy. We then see the marble being used to create a sculpture, and you can begin to question if the art is worthy of the violence. Similarly, in Mother, we see the wounds inflicted on the character Mother as a result of man's need to create and be idolized to the point in which he quite literally takes her heart from her chest to restore their home. Again, you question if the art is worthy of the violence. So now I ask the question of how can we come to understand the suffering that we bring to nature? Maybe our inability to truly begin making the necessary changes to healing our planet is rooted in an inability to empathize with nature's pain. Amelia Jones has questioned whether representational pain has the ability to elicit the same feelings of empathy as viewing pain in real life. She suggests that there are political effects in the imaging of pain, but that for the wounds to affect us, we have to feel to some degree that the same pain could be felt in our own bodies. In both films, we very explicitly see the wounds we have inflicted upon nature represented in very different ways. For example, in the Anthropocene documentary, we can see the violence and devastation of forestry through the images of chainsaws cutting down trees. In Mother, nature's anthropomorphized, and we see Mother violently beaten by the people who have invaded her home. In my interpretation of Jones, the film that would have potential for a more radical or unsettling effect would be Anthropocene, the human epoch, due to the wounds inflicted being real, where in Mother we know this is a fictional representation, making the wounds more conceptual. In relation to pain and wounds, Jones emphasizes the importance of memory of sensation for a representation to be meaningful. What you are seeing needs to activate in the body the viewer's own previous experiences and collective memory. This echoes Rancière's notion that mimesis and representation, defined by the correspondence between senses, are capable of bringing spectators to change their behavior after exposure to the artwork consciously produces political effects. Jones references Rosie Braidotti's term radical relationality to signify a sense of self contingent on the other. It is spectatorship as a form of empathetic identification that is radically intersubjective and multisensory. This is what is necessary for a wound to have political effect that can be productive in leading to action, according to Jones. Empathetic identification, then, can only occur in the cinematic representations of nature. If we embrace indigenous ontology that considers humans as intrinsically connected to Earth, as intrinsically connected to Earth, where identities can be separated from the place we reside. If we embrace a geocentric orientation rather than one that is anthropocentric, it is possible for films like Anthropocene, the human epoch, to have a political effect, bringing people to change their behavior and perspectives. A geocentric orientation would lead us to view ourselves as an extension of the Earth, and radical relationality, as coined by Braidotti, would have us identified with the wounds inflicted on the Earth through cinematic representation. The human gaze on nature reflects the male gaze on images of women, where humans desire control over nature, but also draw meaning, inspiration, and pleasure from looking. In the age of globalization, we travel from the places in which we reside to other corners of the world to view nature's wonders, scaling mountains for the chance to see breathtaking views and to get the perfect photograph. We film videos of beaches and deep blue oceans for the purpose of consumption, finding pleasure in observing nature as an object or experience we can claim for ourselves. Laura Mulvey suggests that it is through the analysis of pleasure and beauty that we can destroy the erotic pleasure in film related to women. This aligns with Rancière's statement that the aesthetic regime of art begins with upheaval in the very idea of perfection conceptualized in Kant's analysis of the beautiful. This can be applied to our conceptualizations of nature. Both Anthropocene, the human epoch, and Mother challenge the notions of beauty and pleasure of the human gaze on nature. They disrupt our anthropocentric process of disidentification. In viewing these films, there's a sense of discomfort, both in identifying with imagery of nature being wounded and finding bodily coherence in the images. There's also discomfort in the inability to identify. These films point to an ontology that does not reduce the feminine in nature into passive icons. They are active agents whose pain it is possible for us to empathize with. The indigenous ontology reflected in these films showcase that the privileging view of man, mind, and creator can be destructive. The beauty and the horror and the female character as maker of meaning act as stains on the symbolic, disrupting the human gaze on nature. And considering the aesthetic philosophy outlined in this presentation, is it possible for us to truly empathize with nature and the wounds we have been inflicting upon it without first moving away from Christian anthropocentric nature-fearing ontology that permeates Western frameworks of knowledge? How can we begin to challenge the human gaze? And I've created a short video to accompany the presentation, so I'll just play that really quickly now.
She breathed life back into the air.
Two things in human beings that they, as I think it to myself, that they want to be alone, but they also want to be together.
And that's it.